What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today, this is not clickbait. This is the best deck right now in Marvel Snap, and I feel confident saying that because the top 2 players on the Infinite leaderboard last season, by a pretty considerable margin, were both playing Junk Bounce. And now if we take a look at this current season, they're still playing it and they are pretty close to the top slot. The difference here is not too huge, and I will also tell you that Shuri Enjoyer has also switched to playing this deck and has earned themselves the 2nd place. And I'm also playing this deck, and I also have hit Infinite with it. So we're gonna take a look at those games, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit more about why this deck is so strong. So what I thought would be fun to do for this video is take a look at the final 4 games that I played this season on my way to Infinite. At the very end of my climb, I had some really fun games, so I thought that would make for a fun video, and we are kicking things off with Spider-Ham, which is honestly not a card that I've played with too much in Marvel Snap, but the best players say, hey, put it in the deck, so I was trying it out, and honestly, I was super impressed with the card. It's really good. I'm gonna talk more about Spider-Ham in just a second, actually, because what is really impressive this game is the curve that this deck gets to deploy. Turn 2 Zabu, turn 3 the Sentry into a turn 4 Beast, which will allow me to bounce Sentry, replay it on turn 5, and then turn 6 I can play Annihilus and give my opponent 2 copies of the Void. So this is a pretty incredible high roll. Honestly, I probably should have snapped already in this game. I didn't snap because of Mount Vesuvius. I figured I could just snap after Mount Vesuvius means my opponent can no longer retreat, and then maybe I'll be able to take him for 4 cubes. In reality though, wasn't thinking about the fact that this play telegraphs very strongly what I have in hand, because if I'm using Beast to replay the Sentry and get that on reveal ability again, it means that I probably already have Annihilus in my hand, because otherwise you'd just use Beast to bounce the Void. So kind of telegraphed it here, and then because of Mount Vesuvius, my opponent is just going to wind up retreating here on turn 5, but it's the thought that counts. This was almost a really insane high roll. Yeah, my opponent is just going to retreat in a moment after we play all of our cards down. Let's get on to the next one. This game is all about Spider-Ham, and this is a really short clip, actually, but I do think it's an important thing to talk about with the deck. Previously in bounce decks, I've played Korg, I've seen Iceman, which both of those cards are cool because they're on reveal ability. If you activate it multiple times with Beast and Falcon, it's able to do something, where Spider-Ham doesn't really do anything beyond the first time that you play it, other than maybe trigger Werewolf by Night. But it's still a really strong effect. Here I get to take out my opponent's Null, and oftentimes what I would do is play Spider-Ham, and if it seemed like a really important card for my opponent, I would just snap. And that's what I'm gonna do in this clip here. I snap on turn 2 after Spider-Ham, and my opponent retreats. And a lot of games were really that simple, and it's great to just be able to take people for a cube here and there on your climb up to Infinite. So that is how we're gonna get one more cube. And now these final 2 games that we're gonna look at are really fantastic ones. There's no other way around it. These are some of my favorite games that I got to play so far this season, and they were the games that got me to Infinite, which is more than you can ask for. We're gonna kick this game off with Nico, who is on the location change ability, because I don't love the Space Throne. The Space Throne isn't great for a deck whose biggest card is, other than the Sentry, a bunch of cards that cap out at 6. And even that is like high for the deck. So I'm gonna get rid of Space Throne here, and then Elysium is also a pretty crazy location for me. And I could have played Forge plus Beast, but because of Elysium, I don't think I'm gonna struggle for energy, and I just wanna get as much value from Beast as I possibly can, and my opponent is gonna help in this regard, because Quake is now going to make it so that I can play Beast, bounce Nico, and then get an additional copy of Beast, which is just incredible. The game gets a little bit crazier from there, even as Mindscape becomes the 3rd location. But yeah, we get a really nice high roll here. I get to make an additional copy of Werewolf by Night and then an additional copy of Beast into cloning vats. So we're gonna move around some cards and do some crazy things here. This one is gonna be a lot of fun. We'll return the Nico to my hand, and then on turn 3, what's my opponent's play here? Into cloning vats. That's going to be a Miss Marvel. Okay, this will be a yeah. They're going to be able to play a bunch of Miss Marvels this game. You might already be able to see what's going to happen here if you take a look at my hand, but this turn I am just going to continue to play a bunch of on reveals, and then I have an energy left over, so I'll throw another Zabu into Elysium here, and yeah, pretty fantastic for me. So I kind of got the best of both worlds with that cloning vats, because I got the free Zabu after it changed into cloning vats, and then I was able to get the additional copies of Beast and stuff. My opponent, I was just thinking they quaked me to try to make it so that Nico was stranded in Space Throne, but obviously we got the better of them there in this situation. My opponent just continuing to play a bunch of Miss Marvels into cloning vats, and now we're about to switch hands with Mindscape, so I have to play Enchantress this turn, and I'm also going to use Beast to bounce both of those Zabus. Those aren't super important, and will give my werewolves the space to move around a little bit. So both the werewolves will jump over into Elysium, then they'll jump back over into cloning vats before rejoining Elysium at the end of the turn. But being able to double Enchantress, my opponent, is just fantastic here, and turns out we're actually not going to be mindscaping my opponent. They are going to flip over one more Miss Marvel, and then their final card is actually Storm onto Mindscape. But still, almost a Mindscape game is pretty fun, and at this point, there's a few things that I could have done on this final turn of the game. There were, honestly, I don't even know what the best play is. I do mess around with a few things here. I play Beast and could do like Beast, bring both of my werewolves over into the flooded location, and then Enchantressing center would mean that only one of the werewolves rejoins me mid. That's probably the best play, turns off my opponent's Miss Marvels and they have priority, so that would be really good for me here too. I tried to play another werewolf, but I wouldn't have the energy to then also play Enchantress, so it doesn't really matter. My opponent winds up retreating. There were a few different options though that I could have had this game. I do think Beast into Enchantress was probably the best one, but it was fun just to take a look at some other ones. But regardless, 99.0. I do have to win 8 more cubes though, and I've kind of given it away because this is, I said, the final game before I hit infinite, and it's gonna be a sweet one. It's gonna be an 8 cuber. You can see we've got a pretty good hand to start this game off, and partially want to make up for lost cubes that I didn't get in that first game that we looked at in this video. But Zabu with all of my 4 cost cards plus its Onslaught Citadel Zabu, we're snapping, baby. This is a really, really fantastic setup here. And interestingly, my opponent with a turn 1 the Hood into Atlantis, I kind of have an idea of what my opponent might be up to. They might be playing the same thing that I'm playing here, and that's confirmed on turn 2 with their counter snap, and then also playing Zabu into Onslaught Citadel. It's kind of what I was expecting to see, to be totally honest, and it's a pretty known quantity now, this deck. But then we get District X. So no longer is this game about a known quantity. I am using District X to get infinite this season, which is really sweet, and honestly, I love it. I know that there are some, I'll say, differing opinions on District X. It's one of my favorite locations in the game. At some point, I am going to do a video just on all of my favorite District X moments, but definitely I think like a really fun and random like skill testing kind of card, because it makes you play with a bunch of cards that you might not otherwise play with. And I still think we've got a pretty reasonable setup that got me here. We'll get to play Werewolf, and then I will get to Forge. I am thinking like so I'm doing the math right now. If I forge Sentry in Atlantis, and then my opponent gives me the Hood, I actually lose that location to Annihilus. Annihilus would be 11 points in Atlantis, and my Forged Sentry plus the Hood, giving it -3 and taking away the Atlantis bonus, would then mean I only had 9 points over in Atlantis. So not great, but I do like the ability to dump both of my 4-cost cards here with Zabu and then turning off my opponent Zabu. At least that was the idea. Cosmo is going to stop me from doing that, but we can tell it was definitely a mirror match, as my opponent also has Werewolf by Night on their side of the board. We do have priority, and there's honestly probably not a great way to get rid of priority here, so there's not really too much we can do. All I can do is Mirage, move the werewolf over one more time, and I mean, priority isn't super important to me other than the fact that my opponent might have Shang-Chi, but I don't have Shang-Chi, so it's not like super important to manage, so I'm just going to try to make the best play possible, and that is Mirage and then Invisible Woman, both in Atlantis, and just adding a few more points to that location. The goal here, also moving Werewolf over to that location, was to play around a turn 5 Annihilus, giving me the Hood over there. But my opponent's going to go for Falcon instead, and Mirage gave me Beast. I almost missed that, but Mirage gave me Beast, so now I can bounce the Void up into my hand, and I actually all of a sudden have a really good shot to win this game. My opponent might Shang-Chi me over in Atlantis, but I have priority now, which is actually kind of a good thing, because now it means I can move my werewolf out of Atlantis, and I'll be able to win the other 2 locations, possibly. It depends what my opponent plays. If they are able to, I mean, they could just replay the Hood and move Werewolf back over into Onslaught Citadel. That would be a little bit annoying. I would have 12 power there. They would have, let's see, 2 plus 10. They would have 12 power there. Okay, so then it would come down to differential, and my werewolf is bigger than their Atlantis crew, so I would win that game. So I actually have a pretty reasonable shot here. They do also have the demon that they could break out, and from the first time that they played their Hood earlier on. But we'll see what they come up with here against my Miles Morales and my Werewolf by Night. They're going to move Zabu over into District X, which actually allows me to win that location, but their werewolf is going to get out of there. But they didn't play for Atlantis. They didn't have the Shang-Chi, which means we take them for 8 cubes, and that gets me to Infinite this season. A really silly game, a really silly way to get Infinite, and that Beast might have actually been from District X because it was a non-split, non-variant Beast. But either way, I will take it. 8,000 snap points and in the top 200, or top 300 rather, with a sweet new card back. I don't have too much more to say about the deck that those games didn't cover, but I do have a few other clips that I wanted to share from an earlier version of this video that I never wound up publishing. They changed Beast, and that is something that I do kind of have to address, because these stats on the screen, .geo and Poggy Bonzi, reaching number 1 and 2 on the leaderboard, are with the old version of Beast. But I've reached out to all of the players that I've talked about in this video, and I've played the deck in both iterations as well. All of that is to say, I think the deck is still very, very good. These players and more, Shuri and Joy are there on 4th place on the leaderboard. You can see them. They are still playing the deck too. And Beast is really still fantastic despite the nerf, which might be a buff. We just had this discussion with Hulkbuster. It's still really good. Anyways, here's a few more clips. This was one of the first games that I played with this deck, and we've got some pretty key information here in the form of the Living Tribunal from White Palace. So I kind of know what my opponent is up to, and I'm snapping here not actually because of Gamma Lab, but I think it's cool that it looks like a snap because Gamma Lab, and that is going to throw my opponent off the scent of why I'm really snapping, and means that it's not that terrible when my opponent magics me and turns the Gamma Lab into Limbo, but I will pretend like it is a big deal. But the real reason that I think that this hand is great is because it looks like my opponent is a MODOK Hela list. Those are typically the ones that you see play Invisible Woman. So Enchantress on turn 5 into that Invisible Woman might just be able to win the game here. So that is actually what I've got brewing now, and I believe I will develop that this turn. You could potentially play it turn 6 against a limbo. There's a little bit of like mind games there. Most people won't go for the mind games without knowing that the opponent has Enchantress. That's more of a conquest thing, I think. So this turn, I'm just going to play the Hood and Enchantress, and then my opponent will have to, if they played MODOK into Invisible Woman this turn, which they did, discard their entire hand. And let's see, does it include Hela? It's got Annihilus. That was an interesting thing. They took my Annihilus, but they did also have Hela, so we will be able to beat them. It's actually a pretty big deal that we made them discard Annihilus too, because that was almost something that I was concerned about, and now I just don't have to care. This is a Project Pegasus game, which isn't super impressive. I don't think Project Pegasus is a great location for this deck. I just get to play a turn 1 Werewolf by Night, but the game gets pretty interesting here. Iron Lad shows me that my opponent has Alioth, and then my opponent is also bunked in the Space Throne. Awkwardly, this deck doesn't actually have a bunch of ways to beat 6 power in the Space Throne, but it makes for an interesting endgame. My opponent floods out the 3rd location and then shows me Supergiant. This is my first game against Supergiant here, and we know they have Alioth coming. So that's a little bit scary. However, we do have a pretty big lead in Project Pegasus. We aren't going to have priority though, going into the final turn. So my opponent is going to be able to Alioth me, but kind of just why I'm showcasing this game, I think Annihilus is a pretty okay card against Alioth specifically. So we're gonna look at one more example later on in this video, but this is like a pretty good example too, because I get to just tie the Space Throne and I know my opponent can't beat me there because they're already filled up in that location, and I know they can't Alioth me there. That's the other important thing. If they decide not to play their Alioth this turn, then we get to play Demon Sentry and we're kind of just killing it, and then we get to give them all that negative power. But even if they do Alioth me, I have a pretty big lead currently in Project Pegasus, and unless they go like Alioth into Shang-Chi or something, then I think we're going to be okay, because we will be able to tie the Space Throne and win that flooded location. So looking good here. Claw does make things a little bit tricky, but we do still ultimately grab the win in Project Pegasus and in the flooded location. Here's one more Supergiant example. So one thing that you want to do in this scenario is play your Annihilus into a location where it won't benefit your opponent to Alioth you there, because I'm already winning by so much in the Abbey that even if my opponent does Alioth me in that center location, we're going to make them lose the game, right? So that's the plan, and we can do that by playing Forge plus Demon into Central Park, because then we will be beating them by 2 in Central Park, even if they do Alioth me center. So that's just one other way that this deck can play around Supergiant in some scenarios. There's otherwise like a mind game around it all. Did they play Annihilus there, or did they not play Annihilus there? It's more on your opponent to figure out the mind game, because you can just play one card on your 5th turn and then they don't really know what it is that's actually there, and they'll possibly Alioth you. But in this case, like I said, it really doesn't matter, because Alioth is not going to be enough to flip the Abbey, and we will be able to grab the win in Central Park. I wanted to show off Lily as well, because she just got groomed and she's looking super cute. But that is going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.